Hi, I'm Mrs. Fish, and welcome to Mrs. Fish's School. I have my master's in cultural linguistics and been teaching English language learners for over 10 years. And I am going to be talking today with you about the legal obligations schools must follow and provide English language learners. That's right, we're talking about federal and state law. Whoop, whoop. All right, let's dive in. All right, so a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Today we're going to be talking about federal mandates, the Lau versus Nichols court case, the Lau plans districts must create, implement, and follow, and a little bit of why this is important to you. If you have ever worked or will work with English language learners, it is absolutely vital that you understand the legal obligations that you must follow in order to provide those students an equitable and whole education, and making sure that they are getting the services they need in order to be the most successful in your classroom. There's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to English language learning students, and even though a lot of these mandates have been in place since the 1970s, there is still unequitable practices happening in every single day in school. So let's make sure that no one is breaking the law, because of course you don't want to break the law when working with your English language learners. So what are the laws? Let's go over them. All right, let's talk about some federal laws for English language learning students in your classroom. Okay, under the Title VI of the Civial Rights Act, it states it prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin for any activities or educational functions that are provided federal funding from the U.S. government. So let's break down, what does that mean? Number one, that means public schools may not deny any student based on their national origin or immigration status into that public school district. So every student has an equal and equitable opportunity to have an education. Number two, it means public schools must offer language assistant programs for any student that is not proficient in English. What does that mean? That means there must be an English language teacher. They must have an English language program that they are working on, and that school district must have a way of assessing what students that are enrolled into their schools need English language assistance. Okay. Number three, public schools must communicate all communications in that student's home language. If they are not proficient in English and their family, guardians, parents at home do not speak English, they speak a different language, that communication must be provided in their home language. So that means there's no barriers when it comes to enrollment, when it comes to any information vital for that student's academic career, coming from the district office, from the classroom, from the school. All information that is sent home for that student must be translated or get an interpreter, so there is equitable and equal communications of information about that student's educational career. So the next federal law is the Equal Opportunities Act of 1974. This act requires states and educational agencies and school districts to take action to overcome any language barriers for English language learning students in order for them to participate equitably in any state or federal or district mandated educational program. So what does that mean for you and your school? That means, number one, they must provide some form of language proficiency program in order to help break down language barriers in their school. The federal government does not provide that program, but it does provide guidelines in order to meet an equitable and robust language program, but it doesn't hand you a program, okay? And we're going to go over what that is later. It's called the Lau plan. So number one basically means under the Equal Education Opportunity Act, every school must have a program. Number two, they must be implemented effectively. That means there must be materials, resources, and English language learning teacher in order to implement that language program effectively. And number three, that language program must be assessed in order to prove and show that it is breaking down language barriers, as well as there must be a proper English language assessment to see if that student is progressing in their English skills. So that is a little piece. I'm going to give a few examples of how a school district might violate the Equal Educational Opportunity Act to make sure that, of course, your school is not violating the EEOA Act for English language learners, because we would never want to break a law. So these are common violations that do break laws. And our goal is to not break laws for our English language learners. Number one would be not providing an English language program for your English language learners in your school district. That violates the law. Number two, fails resources for the English language program. Resources could be what are the materials needed in order to instruct that student, or having an English language learning teacher, failing to have one in your school district or in your school to serve those students. Number three would be failing to identify English language learners. So not having a process in order to identify new students that are enrolled, their origin of language and their language proficiency in English. Number four is exiting an English language learner preemptively. So that means you're exiting them before they are proficient in English. That violates the law. Number five is failing to communicate in that student's home language, vital and important information for their educational success and career, to their parents or guardians. So if their parents and guardians are not fluent in English, that means that information must be translated orally or written in the language that they best understand. And if you don't do that, you are violating the Equals Opportunity Act. You're violating law. Okay. Number six is you are not providing, you fail to provide English language learners with special educational services if needed, or you are putting them in special educational services when they're not needed, equitably giving them whatever services they best need in order to succeed. So just because a student might be in special education, you do not stop giving them English language learning services. Okay, I hope that was kind of clear. And number seven is excluding English language learner from gifted and talented programs. Just because they are, their English is not proficient does not mean they cannot be gifted and need those services. So those are some quick ways that you don't want to be violating the Equal Educational Opportunities Act. So make sure your school district is following the law. So now we're going to talk about the Lau versus Nichols Supreme Court case of 1974. This court case was extremely influential in how public schools move forward with how we help address equitable education for English language learners. So in this court case, the basis of it was that there was claim that student was not provided an equal education because they did not understand the language in which the instruction was being taught. The court agreed with Lau, stating that there is no equitability in merely providing a student the same facilities, teacher, textbooks, curriculum, if that student does not understand the language in which it is being taught. That forecloses a meaningful education due to the language barrier. So basically they said in a nutshell, opportunity does not mean the same education for every student, but the same opportunity to receive an education. Equitable education can only be possible if language is no longer a barrier. So therefore, we now have the Lau plan to help break down those barriers for students to access the learning, and that way their language is not a barrier when accessing the learning in their classrooms. So what is the Lau plan? Let's go over it. So under the Equal Opportunity Act, every school district must have a language program. Now, they do not give hand them a language program they must follow, but they do give them very strict criteria in order to then create your language program that best fits your school district, and that is a LAU plan. So all school districts must create and write a LAU plan that is then a public document that anyone could look up. So you could look up your LAU plan for your school district right now and see what is provided for your English language learners. Now, the Act does provide guidelines that schools must follow when writing their LAU plan. So let's go over those. So in your LAU plan, you must have one, LAU plan principles. So what are the principles that your district are following? 2, you must have a way of identifying English language learners and your school district, either a home language or whatever, but there must be like a very set processes in order to identify any student that speaks a different language. And then how are you planning to put them in your language program? ELL, some language assessment. 3, you must have a clear description of what is your language program in your school district and how you plan to implement that to best meet the needs of your language learners in your classroom so that language is not a barrier when having instruction. 4, what are the processes of meaningful access to co-curriculum and extracurriculum activities for your English language learning students? 5, ongoing district level English language learning professional development. Number 6 is an annual assessment to test the language proficiency of your English language learners. This is a state mandated test that must be given every year to test the 4 domains of language: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Some of those tests are ALPA 21 and wide access tests. So which one of those do you plan to give your students to annually evaluate their language proficiency? Number 7 is language instruction exit criteria. So what do they need in order to officially be proficient in English and exit the English language program? Number 8 is monitoring. So how do you plan to monitor the students that have exited those programs and continually give equitable information to parents in the language that they understand? And number 9 is evaluating the language instruction that you are then providing every year in your school district to see if it is breaking down language barriers for your families. So that is your LAU plan. I was part of the team of writing mine for my school district, so make sure that you have a LAU plan. Your LAU plan should be updated annually, and to make sure that you're following federal laws, because no one wants to break federal laws. All right, so that was a little overview of some laws and regulations that help support English language learners in your classroom. But you might be wondering, okay, but doesn't Mrs. Fish, what does this have to do with me as a classroom teacher? Isn't this all the responsibility of maybe my district or my admin or the English language learning teacher? Yes, it is their responsibility, but it is yours as a classroom teacher as well. If you have a student in your classroom that speaks another language, it is your obligation to give them an equitable education as well that breaks down language barriers within your classroom. That lift is on your shoulders, as well as every other teacher that works with that student. So do not expect, just because there is an English language learning teacher like me in the classroom, that I, in my room, solely am going to support them. I only meet with most of my students for up to 45 to 15 minutes a day. The rest of the day, they are in core classrooms. And within those core classrooms, language barriers must be broken every single day in order to meet their equitability of accessing the curriculum that is being taught in the classroom. So that means scaffolding instruction, making sure that you are following that student's language plan in order to best meet their needs in your room. If you are contacting families, making sure you're contacting families in the language that they need in order to understand the information. Check out your school's LAU plan. Check with your English language learning teacher in your building to make sure that you're not breaking any language laws. And if you have any more questions, or if you want to read some of the court cases, laws, check out the link below. I'm going to link all of those there so you can deep dive yourself. And thank you for checking in on my video, listening today. I know that you're going to be leaving being a better teacher for your English language learners just because you checked in on what are the federal laws. Again, I'm Mrs. Fish. This is Mrs. Fish's Classroom. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the cool things that you do. And remember that all teachers are language teachers. We learn through language. Therefore, we are all language teachers. Thank you. Have a good one.